something you've forgotten too, Ralph. You seem to have forgotten that I am a woman.
I forgot that you're a woman? How could I? You're always yapping.
They made America laugh every week. On screen, Art Carney and Audrey Meadows felt like family. But when The Honeymooners ended, something strange happened. They never spoke again. No phone calls, no reunions, nothing. Why? Was it a falling out? A quiet feud? Or just two stars moving on? For years, no one had a clear answer, and fans were left guessing.
Life was very different when we made The Honeymooners. Although we all played members of blue-collar families, and money was always tight, we never worried about having a roof over our head.
Now, decades later, pieces of the truth are starting to surface, and the real story might not be what you expect. The magic of Ed Norton. Every great show has that one character who goes beyond just supporting the lead, but steals the scene. On The Honeymooners, that was Ed Norton, played by Art Carney. Norton wasn't supposed to be the star because the show was built around Jackie Gleason's loud, blustering Ralph Cramden. But time after time, it was Norton's oddball charm and his offbeat timing that made audiences roar with laughter. And the thing is, Carney made it look effortless. Ed Norton was, on paper, a sewer worker from Brooklyn. A blue-collar guy, if you will. But the way Carney played him, Norton was also whimsical, childlike, and just a bit out there. He wasn't dumb, just easily distracted. He could be staring at a faucet, pretending to conduct an orchestra, while Ralph boiled with impatience beside him. Carney never rushed. He let every beat play out, stretching the moment until you couldn't help but laugh. That's what made Norton so memorable. Carney had a natural gift for physical comedy. Not slapstick exactly, but somewhat more subtle. He'd gesture with exaggerated elegance, tiptoe like a cartoon, or stare blankly with perfect timing. His body language was half the joke. You didn't even need him to say anything. One confused glance could bring the house down. But Carney also gave Norton depth. Under all that quirkiness was a loyal friend. No matter how many times Ralph blew up or barked orders, Norton was there, patient and always ready to help. That warmth made the character real. It grounded him and showed that even though he could land a punchline, he also had heart. And that balance is hard to pull off. But Carney did it week after week. What's funny is that Gleason himself knew Carney was gold. Though he was the star, Gleason recognized true artistic genius when he saw one. Their chemistry on screen was lightning in a bottle, and everybody loved how they played off each other like old partners. And in those moments, it was Norton who often came out shining. One of the most famous examples was the scene where Ralph asks Norton to help him write a letter of complaint. Ralph tries to dictate seriously, but Norton starts the letter with, "Dear Sir or Madam, enclosed, please find," using his old typing class lessons. Ralph loses it, and Norton just sits there, blinking, confused about what he did wrong. The scene is so simple, but the way Carney plays it is perfect. People couldn't get enough of him. Even when Gleason revived The Honeymooners in later years with different cast members, fans always missed the real Norton. Carney had made the role so iconic that no one else could capture that mix of absurdity and heart. What's more, Carney never milked it. He wasn't trying to outshine anyone, so he didn't overdo the jokes or steal the spotlight. He just understood the rhythm of comedy. He knew when to pause, when to react, and when to let a scene breathe. That kind of comedic intelligence is rare. But before he became the beloved comic we all loved and couldn't get enough of, Carney faced struggles and moments that defined who he was. And those early years tell a story you might never expect. Early life, war, injury, and trauma. Before the fame and the unforgettable role of Ed Norton, Art Carney was just a quiet kid from Mount Vernon, New York. He was born in 1918 as the youngest of 6 brothers. He grew up in a working-class Irish-American family during the tail end of World War I. His father sold newspapers for a living, and things were never exactly easy, but they weren't tragic either. Carney wasn't the kind of kid who chased the spotlight. In fact, he was shy. He loved to mimic voices and characters at home, but he rarely showed off in public. It wasn't until high school that he started doing impressions for laughs. His classmates noticed how good he was, and pretty soon, he became the go-to guy for jokes and voices. That talent would later land him a job in radio, but even then, he was more comfortable behind a microphone than in front of a crowd. But his career was just getting started when the world changed. In 1943, at 25 years old, Art Carney was drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II. He was sent to Europe, where he served as an infantryman. The war was brutal. Carney fought in the Battle of Normandy, just days after D-Day, and during one of the missions, his leg was badly injured by a mortar shell. He was hit hard and had to be carried off the battlefield. The injury was pretty serious. His leg was shattered, and doctors had to insert a metal plate into it. From that point on, he walked with a limp, which was something he did his best to hide throughout his acting career. Sometimes he used a cane off camera, but on screen, most people never noticed. He had learned how to move in a way that worked for the role, especially when comedy was involved. After the war, he returned to the stage and radio. His radio work picked up again quickly. He was a regular on The Big Story, Gangbusters, and Casey, Crime Photographer, where his ability to change voices and tone kept him in steady demand. But his most important partnership came when he met Jackie Gleason. Carney was cast in a sketch with Gleason on the Cavalcade of Stars show in 1951, and the chemistry was instant. Their working rhythm was natural, and audiences loved it. That sketch would eventually grow into The Honeymooners, and Carney's role as Ed Norton became one of the most beloved in television history. The phenomenon of The Honeymooners. When The Honeymooners hit TV screens in 1955, nobody expected it to leave such a lasting mark. It only aired for one season, just 39 episodes, but it became one of the most loved sitcoms in history. It had no fancy sets or special effects, just great characters, smart writing, and a cast that knew how to work together. At the center of it all were Ralph Cramden and Ed Norton. Jackie Gleason played Ralph, the loud, big-talking bus driver with big dreams and a short fuse. Art Carney was Ed, the friendly sewer worker who never seemed to fully understand what was going on, but was always happy to be there. Together, they were pure comedy gold. Carney's timing was sharp, but he never tried to steal the spotlight. He knew exactly when to speak and when to pause. That made Gleason's outbursts even funnier. Carney and Gleason had something rare, real chemistry. Gleason could be unpredictable, but Carney stayed calm and quick on his feet. Their back and forth felt natural, like two guys who had known each other forever. That's what made the show work so well. Even when nothing much was happening in the plot, watching them talk or argue was enough. And then you had Audrey Meadows as Alice, Ralph's wife, and Joyce Randolph as Trixie, Norton's wife. They brought a sharp, no-nonsense balance to the men's wild energy. Alice's eye rolls and quick comebacks became part of what made the show feel real. The whole setup was simple but relatable, and people saw themselves in those characters. Even though it only lasted one season, The Honeymooners never really went away. Reruns played for decades, and people kept laughing. Carney won an Emmy for his role, and his character, Ed Norton became one of TV's most unforgettable sidekicks. He made being weird feel charming. Still, for a show that seemed so close-knit, there were things fans didn't expect. After it ended, the cast went their separate ways. Gleason stayed in the spotlight, but Carney pulled back. Over time, people began to wonder about the cast's relationships, especially between Carney and Meadows. They seemed so close on screen, but what happened after the cameras stopped rolling? Did he never speak to Audrey Meadows again? Art Carney and Audrey Meadows made millions laugh together as Ed Norton and Alice Cramden on The Honeymooners. Their chemistry felt effortless, and even though they weren't a couple on the show, they were part of a television family that America loved. Jackie Gleason was the unpredictable center, but Carney and Meadows brought balance and a subtle kind of magic. So when fans found out, years later, that Carney and Meadows reportedly didn't stay in touch after the show ended, it raised eyebrows. Could it be true? Did Ed Norton and Alice Cramden never speak again after the curtain dropped? There's no public record of a falling out, no reports of arguments or tension during production. If anything, the opposite seems to be true. Carney and Meadows worked together seamlessly on set, working through Gleason's improvisational style with skill and grace. Both were professionals who showed up, delivered, and left the audience wanting more. And yet, outside of the set and beyond show, their connection seemed to fade. There are very few joint interviews or photos of them together in later years. While Joyce Randolph, who was the show's fourth major cast member, would occasionally talk about the group's dynamics, Carney and Meadows' relationship remained largely unspoken. But why the silence? Some believe it wasn't personal, and it was just the times. The 50s were a different era in television, and stars didn't necessarily become lifelong friends. Once a show wrapped, people moved on to the next gig or stepped away from the spotlight entirely, as Carney did for long stretches. He was a private man, and The Honeymooners, for all its fame, was just one chapter of his life. There's also the Jackie Gleason factor. Everyone knew Gleason ran a tight ship, and he was said to be unpredictable and controlling at times. The cast was close while the show was in production, but that closeness may have been more about shared experience than lasting friendship. Gleason himself wasn't particularly close with his co-stars off-camera. It's possible that distance trickled down to everyone else. Another point to consider is Carney's personality. He wasn't one for the limelight, so he was hardly ever found doing reunions or talk shows. He wasn't interested in nostalgia tours, so even if he had cared deeply for Meadows, staying in regular contact might not have been in his nature, especially considering the many personal battles he had to fight. Because even though he was making the world laugh, he had struggles, and those struggles made up who he really was outside the screen. His battle with addiction and stage fright. Carney might have made millions laugh as Ed Norton, but behind the laughs was a man carrying such heavy burdens that few ever saw. For all the joy he brought to others, Carney himself was often fighting battles that had nothing to do with scripts or cameras. Two of the biggest were his struggle with alcohol and a long war with stage fright. His drinking didn't start as something out of control. Like many in show business, it probably began socially. But over time, as pressure mounted and as success came with its own kind of loneliness, alcohol became more of a crutch than a comfort. Carney was a private man, so few knew just how much he struggled. But those close to him could see it. It showed up in his behavior on and off the set. He was never a troublemaker, never out of control in public, but the sadness lingered underneath. Some actors thrive on attention, but Carney wasn't one of them. You could even say that he was happiest when the spotlight was just a little dimmer. He didn't need to be the loudest in the room or the one taking center stage. That's partly what made him such a good partner to Jackie Gleason. Gleason could be loud, brash, and commanding, but Carney balanced that with subtlety, wit, and charm. But being the quieter half of the duo came with its own strain. Carney wasn't always comfortable being recognized or praised, and with that discomfort came a kind of anxiety that crept up, especially before live performances. Stage fright isn't something people often talk about when it comes to seasoned professionals. You'd think someone with a long career and an Emmy on his shelf wouldn't feel shaky before a show. But Carney did. He felt it deep in his bones. Before stepping on stage, whether it was a sitcom, a Broadway play, or even a guest appearance, he sometimes froze up. Friends recalled how he would get physically sick before performances. He would get severe nerves that were enough to make him question why he kept doing it in the first place. He once said in an interview that acting was something I loved, but it scared the hell out of me. That kind of honesty wasn't common back then because most actors wore a mask. But Carney didn't always do that. When he was struggling, he'd pull back, cancel appearances, and just retreat into himself. And when the nerves got too loud, the bottle was there to quiet them. For years, he leaned on alcohol to get through. The drinking affected his health, his work, and his relationships. His marriage suffered, and he became harder to reach, emotionally and physically. And for someone who had brought so much light to others, that darkness was heavy to carry alone. Eventually, the drinking caught up with him. He had to step away from projects and even turn down roles. He lost time, years even, to the haze of addiction. But while that is the story of many famous people, Carney's didn't end there. He fought the addiction, went through treatment, and soon after, he began to heal. He admitted he had a problem, even though the culture at the time made that hard to do. It wasn't common in the 60s and 70s for celebrities to talk about addiction the way they do now. But Carney took the steps anyway. He worked on his health, reconnected with people he'd pushed away, and most importantly, he tried to forgive himself. Over time, he found his way back to the work, but this time, he came with a new kind of depth. His later performances carried more weight, and you could feel the life behind the characters he portrayed. But Carney never completely lost his stage fright. And maybe that was a good thing. Maybe that nervous energy reminded him of what was at stake, and how much he cared about getting it right. He once said that the fear kept him honest, and that every time he stepped out in front of people, he felt like he had to prove himself all over again. And in proving himself, he would go on to beat critically acclaimed actors and claim a prestigious award. The Oscar that surprised everyone. When Art Carney won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1975, a lot of people did a double take. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because nobody expected it. That year, the Best Actor race was packed with big names. You had Al Pacino nominated for The Godfather Part 2, Dustin Hoffman for Lenny. There was Albert Finney and even Jack Nicholson, who were all heavy hitters. And then there was Carney, known mostly as Ed Norton from The Honeymooners, nominated for a small film called Harry and Tonto. Most people hadn't even seen it. The film followed Harry Coombs, a retired teacher in his 70s who gets evicted from his New York apartment. With nowhere to go, he packs up his things, grabs his cat, Tonto, and heads out across America. That's it. There were no explosions, courtroom drama, or anything remotely exciting. It was just a man trying to figure out what's left of life when everything familiar is gone. Carney brought something special to the role, though. He wasn't playing a big personality, and he didn't shout or show off. He just was Harry. Gentle, honest, a little sad, and a little funny. You forgot you were watching an actor. You believed this was a real man with a cat and a suitcase, trying to reconnect with his kids, make peace with the past, and find new meaning in whatever time he had left. And it hit people. When the Oscar night came around, most people assumed Pacino or Nicholson would take it. Carney, who was 55 at the time but made up to look nearly 20 years older in the film, wasn't even campaigning hard. In fact, Carney didn't think he was going to win. He was surprised himself, but when his name was called, the audience was just as shocked and then stood up to applaud. It wasn't just a win for Harry and Tonto. It was a win for a different kind of performance that didn't rely on big speeches or heavy drama. Carney proved that subtlety, heart, and truth could carry just as much weight as intensity. And for those who only knew him as the goofy sewer worker from Brooklyn, it was a moment of revelation. It proved that Carney had range. He always had. He'd just never been given enough roles that let him show it. That Oscar changed how Hollywood saw him, even if Carney himself never chased the spotlight. He didn't use it to launch a flashy second act. He stayed selective, quiet, and mostly out of the public eye as usual. Family, love, and redemption. Off-camera, Carney's life was a lot messier and more complicated than anyone might have guessed. Behind all the jokes and smiles, he had struggles with relationships, family, and even himself. But through it all, he had a lot of love and second chances. Carney was married 3 times to 2 women, but the story that really stands out is his relationship with his first and third wife, Jean Myers. They first got married back in 1940. Together, they had 3 kids, 2 sons named Brian and Paul, and a daughter named Eileen. Like a lot of couples, they had their ups and downs. The pressure of Carney's acting career, plus his battles with alcohol and anxiety, put a strain on their marriage. Things got rough, and in 1965, they divorced. Even after they split, Jean wasn't just some ex. She had been a big part of his life, and it was clear there was still something real between them. People were surprised when Carney and Jean got back together and remarried in 1980. That's 15 years apart. It's not every day you hear about a story of a couple breaking up, then finding their way back to each other later on. Their second marriage wasn't flashy or full of drama. It was simple and felt like a real chance to start fresh. By then, Carney had stepped away from Hollywood's bright lights. He wasn't looking for fame or big roles anymore. He just wanted peace, and Jean gave him that. They lived together in Connecticut, away from the noise, where he could be himself without the pressure to perform. This second chance was a kind of redemption for both of them. It showed that even after years of pain and mistakes, people could forgive and build something better. It was the softer side of Carney, one that most people never saw, because they only knew his on-screen characters, or the star that he once was. His relationship with his kids wasn't perfect either. Carney was often busy, focused on his work, and sometimes his struggles made it hard to be a present father. Brian, Paul, and Eileen have talked about how their dad wasn't always around, and that the distance between them was tough. But they also say he loved them deeply and tried to make things right when he could. Despite everything, family was important to Carney. It was his anchor in a world that could be loud and unpredictable. His son Brian even went into the entertainment business as a writer and director, though he didn't become a household name like his dad. Carney's personal life was tangled up with his battles against alcohol and anxiety. For years, he struggled with these issues, which made it harder to connect with people around him. Even though he was a comic genius, he faced real pain off stage. His stage fright and nervousness followed him through his career, and these struggles sometimes pushed him away from friends and family. But what's touching about Carney's story is that, despite everything, he never gave up on love and family. He found his way back to Jean and built a life together away from the cameras. That's a kind of victory too, even if it was quiet and unseen by most. The years of total withdrawal. After decades in the public eye, Carney quietly slipped away into a shell of his own making. By the mid-'80s, his work became more and more sporadic. A small role here, a TV movie there. And then, one day, he stopped showing up on screen altogether. No one made much of a fuss. But to those who had grown up watching him, it felt strange how someone who once made millions laugh could vanish without a word. Part of it, no doubt, was by design. Carney had never seemed fully comfortable in the spotlight. Even at the height of his fame, he kept his private life quiet. He didn't seek headlines. He wasn't at every Hollywood party. He did the work, then went home. And when the work stopped feeling worth the trouble, he chose to stay home for good. By all accounts, his later years were marked by near total withdrawal from public life. He didn't give interviews, and he rarely made appearances. When asked why he didn't act more, Carney would say something simple like, he didn't need it anymore. Surely not from a place of bitterness, but satisfaction that he had done all he could do, and it was time to call it quits. What's interesting is that Carney could have cashed in. He could have written a memoir, done the talk show circuit, maybe even taken one last high-paying film role. But he didn't. That choice, more than anything, seemed to reflect who he truly was. Not someone chasing legacy or attention, just a man content to live quietly after years of noise. There's something both admirable and a little sad about that, though, because while he may have been at peace, the industry never really gave him the send-off he deserved. There was no big tribute or lifetime achievement award. He just quietly faded away, as if no one knew what to do with someone who didn't want to be celebrated. Those who knew him best say the withdrawal wasn't about bitterness or regret. It was more about maintaining his peace after years of noise. Carney had spent much of his career battling personal demons like alcohol, anxiety, and stage fright. He was always a little on edge, even when the cameras weren't rolling. So maybe, in stepping away, he finally found something close to calm. There's also the question of health. As he aged, Carney reportedly faced a number of physical challenges, though he never made them public. He was a smoker for many years and dealt with old injuries from his time in World War II. It wouldn't be a stretch to assume that health played a role in his decision to step back. The final years and death. Even though Art Carney stepped away from the spotlight, he never really disappeared from people's minds. The Honeymooners kept playing on TV over and over, and for many, it was still the classic show of a special time in television. Carney didn't chase fame or try to stay in the public eye, but people never forgot him. To many, he was always Ed Norton, the funny, loyal sidekick who made the show so memorable. In his later years, Carney lived quietly in Westbrook, Connecticut. It was a peaceful place near the ocean where he could just enjoy the simple things in life. He lived there with Jean, his third wife, and they kept a low profile. There were no flashing cameras or gossip magazines around their home. Just calm, regular days spent away from all the noise. Carney didn't often go to public events in the 90s, but he wasn't completely out of sight. He showed up sometimes to support causes he cared about or to see old friends. In 1994, he appeared in a small role in the movie Last Action Hero. It wasn't a big part, but it reminded people how much warmth he could bring with just a look or a few words. By the early 2000s, though, Art Carney was mostly out of the public eye. When he passed away quietly in his sleep on November 9, 2003, At age 85, many fans were surprised to hear the news. Some didn't even realize he was still alive. He died of natural causes at a care home in Chester, Connecticut. There was no big ceremony or Hollywood tribute to say goodbye. Instead, there were a few obituaries, some statements from friends, and the old episodes of The Honeymooners playing on TV. Jackie Gleason, who played Ralph Cramden, had died years earlier in 1987. Audrey Meadows, who played Alice Cramden, passed away in 1996. With Carney's death, a big part of TV history seemed to come to an end. Joyce Randolph, the last main cast member from the show still alive, later talked about Carney's kindness and how much she enjoyed working with him, also calling him a joy to work with. What are your thoughts on the topic? Did Carney really refuse to speak to Audrey Meadows after The Honeymooners ended? Was it a personal falling out or just the nature of showbiz friendships? What do you think happened behind the scenes, if anything, that kept them apart for so long? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.